And we have breaking news out of Georgia, where state corrections officials delayed the execution of Troy Davis, waiting for a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court. Davis was convicted in 1991 of killing a Savannah, Georgia police officer. 7 of the 9 witnesses recanted their original testimony against him, and 3 jurors who sentenced him want his life spared. This case has garnered worldwide attention and from many condemnation. But for now, as the U.S. Supreme Court considers whether to issue a stay of execution, the Georgia Department of Corrections says, quote, "We are in a delay. There has not been a reprieve issued." Joining us now is NBC's Tong Trung outside the prison tonight. And Tong, I understand that at about 7:12 p.m. this evening, people outside the prison started singing "We Shall Overcome," hearing that this young man may well have received some kind of reprieve, some kind of stay.
Yeah, and it's hard to get word and confirmation on the decision at this point, Martin. There has been sporadic cheers and then moments of silence as people wait here to get any type of word on whether this execution is going to move ahead or is going to be further delayed at this point. At this hour right now, there is a large show of force of riot police. They're in full gear at this point, more than 100, I would say. And on the other side of Highway 36, the Georgia Diagnostic Prison is located on Highway 36 in Jackson, Georgia. Across the street, it's just an average truck stop. But lining the highway right now are hundreds of supporters and protesters. And so on the opposite side, you have hundreds and hundreds of protesters. On the other side, you have a large show of force of Georgia riot police in full gear. And we're assuming, obviously, that this is probably going to be a preventative and preemptive measure just in case anything breaks out, depending on where they go with this execution at this point. And there is a pit area, as if we can call it that, where more protesters are inside the fences of the diagnostic prison. They've been waiting here, chanting, holding vigil, trying to get any word of whether this execution is going to move ahead. And there was a scene about 20 minutes ago that, as I stood from where I'm standing right now, my vantage point, I saw the sun going down, and there was just this orange glow, and you could see below that pit of protesters inside, people praying and hoping there's going to be some type of stay of execution at this point. But at this hour, we're still trying to get some confirmation from the Georgia Department of Corrections of whether Troy Davis is going to be executed. We know that 3 of the surviving members of the McPhail family, Officer McPhail was the officer from Savannah that was shot and killed in this whole situation back in 1989. His wife, his widow, his surviving son, and also his surviving daughter are all in the execution chamber. They've been anticipating this execution for quite some time. They say they're not thirsty for blood, they're thirsty for justice. This has been delayed several times through the years, and obviously right now they just want to get it over with. And they say that all this talk of the recanting of the statements of the 7 of the 9 witnesses, they say all of that is bunk. Look, they said this has gone through the process and under the legal process, and outside of the legal process now, these witnesses are recanting their statements. They say it shouldn't be accepted.
Mr. Davis was due to be executed at 7 p.m. Am I right to assume that he'd eaten his last meal, he was being prepared and taken down to the place where he would be executed?
He has, Martin, and we haven't gotten confirmation from that. But as you can imagine, the Georgia Department of Corrections went through the process as if this was going to move ahead. There's been some type of stay or delay at this point. I shouldn't use the word stay. There's been a delay in the execution. The Georgia Department of Corrections right now is just waiting to hear from the U.S. Supreme Court. And we understand that he did decline. Troy Davis did decline when he was offered the choice of a last meal. He declined it. He spent 6 hours with his family today from 9 o'clock to 3 p.m., family and friends. He declined the choice for a last meal. Instead, he had the prison standard, as they called it, of a cheeseburger, baked beans, and potatoes. Martin.
Tong Trung, stay with us. We'll be back to you later in the broadcast. But joining me now is NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams. And Pete, why has it taken until today for the Supreme Court to receive this?
Well, because it wasn't ready to go to the Supreme Court yet. It started with the clemency process in Georgia. Then it went through the courts. And only when all the options were cleared away in the state of Georgia were the lawyers in any legal position to come to the U.S. Supreme Court. They didn't file here until just after 6 o'clock tonight, 1 hour, I suppose just a few minutes less than the scheduled execution time. About 23 or 4 minutes after that, the state attorney general from Georgia filed with the Supreme Court and basically opposed any stay. So here's where it stands. What the lawyers for Troy Davis have done is they've gone to the U.S. Supreme Court and they've said, look, we're going to file an appeal with you. We haven't done it yet. It's coming shortly was the term they used. But in the meantime, we want you to put a hold on his execution, because it will do nobody any good for you to look at his appeal, decide, yes, you're going to take the appeal, and find out in the meantime he's been executed. So while you wait for the appeal, please hold off on the execution. This is a fairly standard request in death penalty cases. What's unusual about this, of course, is that it comes less than an hour before the scheduled execuation.
Pete, what is the procedure now in terms of the Supreme Court? Does there need to be a majority vote?
Yes. Yes, it takes 5. There are 9 justices. It takes 5 votes to grant a stay. It would take. This may seem odd to you, but it would take 4 votes to hear an appeal from someone. In the normal course of business, when the Supreme Court decides to take a case, it only takes 4 of the 9 justices to agree to hear a case. But it takes 5 votes to grant a stay. So, the justices are not in the Supreme Court building tonight. They're all over the place. I don't factually know where they all are, but the court session doesn't start. The new term doesn't begin for a little over a week. So some of them are in town, some of them are out of town. But this is what the court does all the time in these emergency appeal cases, where there's a clerk at the court who notifies the justices that they may be called upon to make a decision and faxes or gets them on the phone or whatever is required here. But it would take a vote of 5 justices to grant a stay. Now, and the stay will either be granted or denied, and we'll never know precisely which justices voted which way. That's not the way these things are handed down. We will simply get an order that says, in this case, the stay is granted or the stay is denied, and that's it. But the reason it didn't come to the Supreme Court until tonight is that it was procedurally was not in a posture where they could have come to the Supreme Court. And so everything is sort of jammed up here at the end. But, that's the way these cases often happen.
Pete, you've explained that you and many of us don't know where these justices are. So do you think that there will be a formal decision on this stay this evening? Or
Yes.
do you think there will be tonight?
Oh, yes, I'd be very surprised. I mean, the justices, they go at their own pace, but they know what's going on here. They're not ignorant of the fact that the execution was scheduled for 7 o'clock. They're aware that there's the state of Georgia is, in essence, waiting for the Supreme Court to do something. So I'd be stunned if the Supreme Court doesn't do something here within the next hour or so. Martin, just for your information, we went through something like this last week in the case of a Texas man named Dwayne Buck, who was arguing that his sentencing hearing was flawed because there was racially tainted testimony. His execution date was set. His lawyers made a last-minute appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's order granting a stay of execution came 2 hours after the time scheduled for Dwayne Buck's execution. So the state of Texas waited, as the state of Georgia is doing now.
Pete Williams, as ever, thank you for your expertise on this, and we'll be back to you, I'm sure, as the evening progresses.